Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin Hughes, and I don't have any of my little toys with me today, so I can't make my running joke here, so I guess my co-host is this umbrella. Um, but I, d- I do have, I do have one of my best buddies here, Caleb, and we are really excited because Caleb is actually he's going to have his own show now. He doesn't need my help anymore. He's going to go do it himself. So we wanted to introduce his show. So Caleb, what is your show going to be about? What are you kind of going to be covering? What can people expect?
Sure. So hi everybody again. This is probably like my fourth or fifth time I've been on Freed Indeed.
Definitely.
And I guess I just kept hanging around long enough. They're like, just give this guy a shop. He won't go away. So, so anyway, yeah. So I finally gave in and said, yeah, I'll do a show on Free Indeed. So I'm going to do mainly. I'm going to think maybe about once a month, a short 30 to 45-minute video on things on essential orthodoxy. So things that people who are seeking to dialogue with orthodoxy or to maybe even enter orthodoxy, things that they should know before they do. Because especially now with the Reformed and Protestant world coming into contact with orthodoxy in a way it never has, because in all honesty, they're losing their people to the Orthodox world. It's like a lot of people think that, oh, this is just another version of Roman Catholicism that's stealing our people away. But this is not the case. There's so much that people have to unlearn before they can actually learn orthodoxy in proper. And one of the things that really infuriates me with people like Vocab Malone and others like that is they really don't understand orthodoxy. They're reading orthodoxy through the lens of Western philosophy, and that really obscures any sort of proper criticism, or let's say fair criticism, they could offer to orthodoxy. So that's one of the things I'm hoping to do. The first podcast I want to do is on the Holy Trinity, specifically letting our listeners know that, yeah, while you could say the Holy Trinity is the essential Christian doctrine, I believe it is, the Eastern doctrine of the Trinity is not the Western one.
That's right.
We do not believe the same doctrine of the Trinity, as much of a shocker as that is. And I will make the claim that the Orthodox Church believes the original doctrine of the Trinity, whereas the West, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, believes a distorted view of the Trinity. And I want to point out those obvious differences. And you think, well, and a lot of people look at this after I'm done, oh, what's the big deal? Well, I'm hoping to show why it's a big deal.
Right.
Because there are applications and implications from their understanding of the Trinity that affect other doctrines. So, but I'm also going to do one on Gnosticism. There's a growing trend of what I call neo-Gnosticism that's creeping its way into American Christianity. I'm hoping to show some of those places where it does, that people probably run across every day and they don't even know it, and explain what Gnosticism is and why it's so dangerous and antithetical to Christianity. So that's a little bit of a taste of what I'm going to do. I'm trying to do it in such a way that is not a huge scholarly affair. And, not that I won't provide citations if anybody wants citations or books that which they could read. Of course, I will do that. But I want to put this in layman's terms. I want to put this in your everyday, average Joe Blow terms that doesn't require you to have any sort of degree or anything like that. So that's the idea.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. That's super awesome. So, yeah, I think that's going to be really great, and I'm really looking forward to that discussion on the Trinity, because we've been doing kind of our series on all of the various heresies, which was kind of an unintentional series. We just kind of started, we need to do this, we need to do that, and then after a while, it's like, we've answered almost every early Christian heresy.
Yeah.
But Gnosticism is like the arch heresy. It's like the heresy that birthed all heresies. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm really looking forward to you showing the nuance there that in the East we really do. Well, I don't want to say that all of our Western brethren are anti-Trinitarian. There's
No.
definitely some problematic things, and I think it's interesting. I always joke around with my Protestant friends that they're really still Catholic because they do the filioque. So,
Yeah,
so
I've
every time
noticed
they
that.
do that, they pledge allegiance to the Pope.
Yeah, and that's what I'm sort of hoping to show is that, this is something the reformers never ever questioned. They just said, yeah, it's right. And I think there was only ever one Protestant sect that ever completely removed the filioque from their doctrine and their creed. When they said the creed, it's not their creed, but when they say the creed, and I think it was some obscure sect of Anabaptists who actually said, "Yeah, the filioque is a heresy," and I was like, "Wow!" It took an
Right.
obscure sect of Anabaptists to figure this out. But yeah, the people I fight most with about the filioque surprisingly are not Roman Catholics, believe it or
Right.
not, because of the whole Eastern Catholic thing, but mainly Lutherans
That's
and
right.
Presbyterians. I mean, they are militant. Most of them I meet are militant about the
It's true.
filioque. Yeah,
It's
and I'm
true.
just
And
like,
it's really interesting too because I kind of always wonder like what do you gain by keeping the filioque when you're
right,
a Presbyterian? But you're right, Catholics in general don't care that much. Um,
right.
I think
They'll even
most
allow
lay
you to leave it
Catholics,
out in the creed, like they do with the Eastern
right?
Catholics, which I
The
find strange, but okay.
Exactly, Eastern Catholics don't even say the filioque. And interestingly, I remember talking to or reading an article from Catholic Answers where they actually said basically, well, the problem is that if you say the creed in Greek and you say the filioque, then it would be heresy. But if you say it in Latin, then
Right.
apparently there's some kind of nuance there that
Hmm.
makes it. And I'm going, okay, but what about when we translate them to English or to any other given
Yeah.
language? Like, you're
Yeah.
not paying attention to whether or not this Latin nuance comes
Right.
over. And I highly doubt that most people sitting in a pew are sitting there thinking, oh, I know about this archaic language's nuances enough to know that I'm not confessing heresy right now. I don't know.
No.
It's
Yeah. There's
bizarre.
there's I know nobody in my old church growing up probably even knew what the Nicene Creed was, much
That's
less.
true.
So I think they're sort of shielded by their ignorance in that regard. But yeah, at least I will give props to our Roman Catholic brethren in that they at least understand the linguistic problems that the filioque presents for Eastern Christians. But I think Protestants, unfortunately, they don't really care or know about what linguistic problems this presents because what
Because
Rome
their creed
believes.
is in King James English.
That's right. And what I would say, Rome's filioque now, from what I've read, what Rome believes about the filioque, I would not say is a heresy, but like the fact that it's there and you had one bishop who said I can add it there. Yeah, that's a problem. That's one reason I won't say it. Besides the fact that I'm Orthodox.
Right.
Uh, but the Protestant view is not even the Roman Catholic one. They're just like, no, no, yeah, double procession's great, but I'm hoping to demonstrate all that. So they actually do believe the heretical view, and I think John
Right.
Piper is one of the few people who demonstrates that heresy best in that
Right.
in
Oh, he
that
does.
atrocious article he wrote on the Trinity. But yeah, we'll see what happens, but. We're going to cover that, Gnosticism, and then the third one, let me get my list out here of what I'm going to cover. Another topic I want to cover is original sin, the doctrine
Oh,
of original
yeah.
sin. And that's a heavy hitter. It's kind of like when you did that review of, what's the Lutheran fella's name?
William Whedon.
William Whedon, where he said if orthodoxy's right about original sin, it's the death of Protestantism. And I'm like, I know. And
Yeah, I thought that was interesting that he said that, but he never actually showed that we were wrong. He
Yeah, he
just
never.
said
Well,
if Orthodoxy is right on this point, then Protestantism cannot stand. And then he just moves on from that. It's like, wait, hold
right.
up,
And it
man.
was such a bad video to begin with, and I know you made a lot of Lutherans angry with that.
I
And
know, which
it's like,
surprised me actually. I thought that I knew
yeah,
I'd make a few Lutherans angry, but I
a
thought that
lot of
most
them, yeah.
Lutherans would at least be able to recognize that,
The
unlike
problems
William
with
Whedon,
this,
I was being
yeah,
respectful to their tradition. And
yeah.
but man, that
But
was
it was such a bad video. And see, I loved the guys that were saying in the comments section, like, well, this was a private video he did for a group of Lutherans. I'm like, he made the video public. So you're telling me that we can't respond to it? It's like,
right.
come on. It's like, it was such a bad retort. I'm like, well, it was a private video, but he made it public. It's like, come
Right,
on.
exactly.
But in
And
all
if it's so
honesty,
private, then how come one of the Lutheran guys he made the video for is sending it to me and asking for me to do a video about it?
yeah, that too. And in all honesty, I think Will Wheaton is such a revered figure in the
Right.
LCMS, and like it was sort of like touching their golden calf when somebody dared, that one guy, how dare you respond to somebody with a PhD and blood. I'm like, well, just because I'm like, some of the dumbest people I've ever met have PhDs. I'm sorry, but it's true.
Right.
PhDs don't intimidate me. They make me pause, but they don't intimidate me. Um,
Exactly.
there's really dumb people with really bad scholarship that have PhDs.
Look at
But
Ken Wilson.
that's exactly who I was thinking of. uh, yeah, so yeah, that doesn't intimidate me. But no, that was a very good retort you did, and I had to chuckle because I loved your humor. Because I'm like, well, he didn't take himself seriously, so why should you in this
Right.
video?
Right.
But
Oh, it was fun. It was fun.
yeah. Oh, and for your viewers, I was going to say, I'm also planning in January to do what I'm calling the Orthodox Curiosity class, which I am planning to open up for some people who actually live in my area, about thinking maybe 10 to 12 people. And then as well as put it on Zoom, and I have slideshows and things like that. And the way you can think of this as a crash course into Orthodoxy, and I'm planning to talk maybe 30 minutes and then open it up for Q&A afterwards. And I have book recommendations at the end of each section if anybody wants to look further into what
Nice.
I've already talked about, with a lot of the prominent Orthodox authors, from Ancient Faith and others like that. I have a lot of David Bradshaw's books. I know
Awesome.
you know who he is. Very good Orthodox scholar, not a clergy, just a great Orthodox scholar.
Right.
So I have a lot of and mainly it's to help people sort of understand the fundamental philosophical approaches that Orthodoxy differs from in the West, because that's just something people don't tend to get.
Right.
So yeah, it's going to be a fun thing. I think it'll be fun.
I think so too. I hope Vocab Malone watches that
Right.
particular series
I hope he tunes in
because
live.
yeah,
Yeah.
because he actually, one of his big critiques of me is he says that I am Orthodox because of Orthodox presuppositions and don't admit it.
Well,
And
you're Reformed because of Reformed presuppositions that you inherited from the Roman Catholic Church that were never
right,
challenged by Calvin.
right,
Let's
exactly.
turn about fair play here.
Yeah, I
Like,
thought that was but I also thought it was interesting that some of the stuff, because I asked him, like, okay, like what? And some of the stuff that he says are my Orthodox presuppositions are, for example, that the apostles were Orthodox Christians, and I'm going,
what
well,
else should I assume?
right.
Yeah. Well, what do you assume they were?
Right. That was kind of my question, is like, okay, what do you assume they were? Because if you assume that they were anything but Orthodox Christians or Roman Catholics, then you automatically have to believe in some kind of weird Reconstructionist thing.
Right, or proto-reformed sort of thing.
Right.
That's a weird thing. See, I've heard James White say the same thing in his little series he did about church history, and I have to really thank James White because he pulled me out of the Reformed world with his videos. So, James, please keep that on for a lot of people, okay? Um, but but anyway, he said the same thing, that Roman Catholics read the church fathers as if they were Catholic, and they're nothing but. And I'm like, then what are they, James? And
Right.
I'm like, he never answers the questions as to what they are. And I'm like, I'm not saying, I mean, I would agree to the extent that I don't think that, they wore the same robes we do, or that they had the same exact number of feasts we do, and most of them didn't have the same number of councils we did because they didn't live
Right.
in those centuries. So of course there's going to be differences, but I'm like, if you brought the early church and the Nicene fathers back from the dead for a day, and you took them on a tour of churches, which one are they going to recognize as being in continuity with
That's
what
right.
they taught? And I'm going to say they're going to say either the Orthodox Church or the Catholic Church. They're not going to
Right.
look at a Reformed church and say, "Oh yeah, I recognize this. I remember singing Jesus saves, and come thou fount of every blessing, and and the suits and the ties and not communing infants, and it's like,
Oh yeah.
and sprinkling people.
Right.
It's like, yeah, it's like, come on, it's like,
Exactly. These
yeah,
are yeah, exactly.
right,
So definitely I'm really excited about your series there. And so we promised to do a show on horror and
yeah,
paranormal stuff. So let's deliver on that promise. I know a lot of people were really appreciative of the other video I did with Matthew Emerson on horror.
that was
And
fun,
so I'm
yeah.
really excited to revisit that topic a bit and kind of talk about it and the paranormal stuff. So, Caleb, what is a good paranormal story to start us out on talking about horror stuff and paranormal stuff?
Okay. So so this isn't a story that happened to me, but somebody I know. So my biological father, I'm an adoptee. For those of you who don't know, I'm very close to my biological father. And he was telling me about the time he was in the military police not long after I was born, and he said he had a superior officer, who at the time was dabbling in the occult.
Uh-oh.
Right. Right. Yeah. He was buying all kinds of books and, you know, esotericism, the wrong kind of esotericism, not like Christian esotericism. And
Right.
he was dabbling in, black magic and horoscopes and incantations and, all that kind of stuff.
Just
And
asking for demons to
right. So yeah, him and his wife were really, really getting into it. And so my biological father was a Christian, and everybody in his unit knew it. If I get this right, I hope I get this right. They called him like Reverend Robinson, is what they called him, because he wouldn't go to the bars and the strip joints with them
Oh,
afterward.
right.
And and so he said that one day he was coming home from base camp, and he needed somebody to pick him up at the airport. So his superior said that he would pick him up and he would drive him to where he needed to go. So as he picked him up, he told Terry, he said, my biological father, he's like, I'm never dabbling in the occult again. And he's like, why? What happened? And he said, I had something happen to me I cannot explain, but I know nevertheless it was real. And he said him and his wife had been doing certain sets of incantations and spell castings from these books that they had been reading and things like that. And they said it was really late, and they were in the living room watching TV, just a normal night. And you know that phrase about the witching hour,
Yeah.
in the middle of the night. So I'm guessing about this time. He said that he heard something what sounded like clops in the kitchen, like clop, 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 like something walking, right? Like an ant, like a hooved animal would walk,
Whoa,
right?
whoa.
And he's thinking, what the hell is that? And he has his wife, do you hear this? And she's like, yeah. Like, he's thinking he's going crazy, right? He said, so he got up, and this is a military guy, right? This guy could kill you 12 different ways, right?
Right.
He goes in the kitchen, and he said he's frozen with fear. He said there in his kitchen, staring him down, face to face, real as me and you, is a 7-foot tall Pan.
No. Whoa.
The god
Whoa.
Pan. Yeah,
Holy
he said
cow.
just like you would think he'd look. He said the bottom half like a goat with the hooves, the goat horns on his head, the big long spindly beard, the long spindly arms, and
Oh.
he said it was Pan. He's like, I know it was Pan. He said that was the first thing that hit my brain. And he said it
Whoa.
looked right at me and it was walking around my kitchen. Clop, 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 clop. And
Oh.
so he said that he hauled hauled rear end out of that kitchen and was totally flipped out. What's he gonna do? Is he gonna call the cops? You can't shoot it,
Right.
and so he said, but after a while it went away. But he said he can't explain it. He doesn't know where it went or how it went away or what, and he's surprised. I guess he's still alive. And he said, but he said he saw that thing and it looked right at him. It wasn't fake. It wasn't an illusion, and other people saw and heard it that were in his house. And he said, I burned those books the next day. um, but yeah, he had an encounter with the god Pan from Greco-Roman
Oh,
mythology, which,
wow.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
man, that is really spooky.
Hmm.
So, as Orthodox Christians, I think we can totally see, right off the bat, dude made some
Yeah.
serious errors by
Hmm.
actually, inviting these things into his life. But it's interesting that what he encountered is something from, something that human beings have at one time worshipped.
Yeah.
And so it really shows that, like the video we did before talking about how the things that people have worshipped in the past, it's not like these things are, just what modern people call myth, where they just didn't exist and they're just figments of imagination.
Right.
These are real living entities that we can actually encounter, and I think we're going to hear a lot more stories like the one you just shared
Hmm.
as Christianity that people are familiar with is declining in the West, and more people are returning to these pagan practices. One thing I said around here in Portland, I was talking to some people and I said to them, your atheism is not going to stop these demons from attacking you. Just because you believe they don't exist, they're fine with that for
Yeah, they can
now.
operate uninhibited.
Exactly. They're
Yeah.
fine with that for now, but eventually they have all sorts of people who are going to start worshiping them,
Oh, they already
and
are in a
it's
lot of places. Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, what was
Exactly.
it in the last 5 years that there was a temple built to
That's
Odin
right.
in Scandinavia where there hadn't been one for a long time. And Scandinavia, of course, has been secularist for a long time.
Right.
And now that Islam is starting to become more prominent, practicing Muslims are starting to get a foothold in Norway. They realize atheism can't stand up to Islam. It just
Right.
can't. And so you have people returning to the worship of Odin and Thor and all the other Nordic gods. And it's funny, that it was G.K. Chesterton who said that with the post-Enlightenment era and the rise of atheistic philosophy, and you got to think in his time we're talking about Friedrich Nietzsche and
Right.
Bertrand Russell, guys like that. He said, I think that people are going to have to become pagan before they become Christian again.
Mm,
That's an interesting thought.
it is.
Right. He's like, basically, with atheism, you think there's nothing you need to be saved from, and there's nothing that science can't fix, right?
Right.
And so, but when you get into paganism, people generally do this to find some sense of meaning and fulfillment. And then the problem is they need rescuing from those things that they found meaning and fulfillment in. You see what I'm
Right.
talking? It's a vicious cycle,
Exactly.
but I thought that is a really interesting thought, the idea that the world will have to become pagan again before there will be a mass conversion of to Christianity again.
It makes a lot of sense. And the thing is that we are built to worship. So the
Yeah,
atheist is still worshiping. He's just worshiping at
the
the
wrong, yeah.
temple of self. And
Right,
yeah,
which I would say is philosophical Satanism at its core.
exactly.
I mean, LaVeyan Satanism, which I wouldn't even call it classical, Satanism, is very Nietzschean at its core.
Right.
It's very, like you said, it's self-worship, but I would say it's still following the same path that the devil takes, because ultimately the devil is self-exalting and he's an
That's right.
egomaniac. Um, yeah.
Yeah, Jonathan Peugeot had a video where he talked about how he said he doesn't know if Satanists really realize it,
Hmm.
but all of the modern Satanists who say that they're Satanists but then don't believe Satan is real, he
Hmm.
says you could not be a more pure Satanist than to
Hmm.
deny the existence of Satan, because it's like
I
you're
want to be God.
truly
I'm like, hello, that's Satan's
exactly.
own ideas. Um, and I'm like, yeah, you actually do believe in him by action.
That's right.
The whole participation in the myth is the thing.
Exactly.
I think that's what people don't realize. The power of mythology is that once you've bought into the aesthetics of a mythology, it then becomes your burden to imitate that which is in the myth. And I think that Jordan Peterson has done an excellent job of doing that, especially when approaching, Christianity. Just a perfect example for people who don't know what I'm talking about is like in Genesis, you have this concept of God separating the waters from the skies, the tohu abohu, right?
That's right.
The cosmic chaos of the primordial waters, and he sets it to order. And when it was first time I was a dad, with my daughter, my house, which had been nice and ordered and everything, was all of a sudden in shambles. There's bottles on the ground, there's diapers that need to be thrown out. The place is a
Right.
wreck. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then that's when those words from Genesis, he said, and the Lord divided the land from the waters, and then the whole narrative of Genesis kicked in. I'm like, I've got to imitate God in this. And so I start organizing things and I start trying to plan things so there is less chaos in my
Right.
home. I'm like, that is a participation in the myth. And I love the word myth. It's not a People hate that when people refer to Bible stories as myth. I'm like, of course they're myth. Myth's not a fake thing.
Right.
It's only in the modern world that the word mythology has been associated with a lie. And I'm like, of course it's a myth. You know,
Right.
um, and unfortunately, we have pagans who are falling into participating in the myths of the wrong kind.
That's right.
The propaganda of demons, as some of the church fathers would say. Um,
Exactly.
and before all the atheists get mad and say, "Oh, you're just demonizing the gods of other religions," I'm like, it's because you have a bad definition of what a demon is.
That's right.
Um, Humans can be demons,
Yeah.
theologically speaking. Angels can be demons. Fallen gods can be demons. It's like it's a very broad term. So to
That's right.
say that Pan or Zeus or Thor or Marduk is a demon is not to say that, oh, he's a little horned being masquerading as this being from a myth. Well, there's some truth to that, but I'm like,
Right.
no, what I'm saying is that this is a spirit, a very powerful spirit being that has a certain agenda. That's what a
Exactly.
demon is, and humans are spirit beings too, so the word demon can apply
That's
to
right.
humans too. It's a very broad term. It's a descriptive term more than a species term. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually lots of humans are called demons even within scripture. Like
Called
for
Satan's.
example, right. Well, for
Yeah.
example, actually a lot of people don't realize this, but in the book of Jubilees, there's a part where the Nephilim actually die. Some of them grow old, but most of them die in war,
Mm-hmm.
and they're getting cast into Tartarus, and
Mm-hmm.
then 10% of them, whatever that is, come to God and appeal to Him. They don't want to actually repent. They don't want to actually
They just
change
don't
their
want to go to
ways,
Tartarus. Yeah.
but they don't want to be tormented in
Right.
flame. And God says, okay, fine. You can remain on the earth on one condition. you'll basically be on the earth as a demon, and
A
you'll
wandering
afflict the
spirit. Yeah.
wicked.
Yeah.
And so they take him up on the offer. Well, the reason why that's significant, because I know Protestants are going to say, well, that's the Book of Jubilees. We don't believe in that anyway. And even a lot of Catholics will say that. But okay, you don't believe in the Book of Jubilees, but I'm sure you do believe in the Book of Mark. And in the Book of Mark, Jesus encounters a man who says he's possessed by Legion.
Hmm.
Well, in that story I was just talking about from Jubilees, God says you may remain on the earth and afflict the wicked until the time appointed when I will cast you into the abyss.
Yep.
Now, in the book of Mark, when Jesus meets these guys who are possessed by Legion, Legion says something very interesting to Jesus. He says, why have you come here, O Son of God? Are you here to afflict us before the time? So I
Yes.
want I want you to take your King James Bible, read the Old Testament, and tell me where before the time comes from
The
without
1611 King James. Thank you
That's
very
right.
much.
The 1611 King James that has all the books. um, but tell me where it talks about before the time, because it's not there.
Yeah.
Jesus is, or actually Legion is talking about this event that we
Yeah.
only know about through the book of Jubilees. But that shows that those demons Jesus encountered were at one time people.
Right, that's exactly right. And it's funny because the show Supernatural, the show
Yeah,
Supernatural, that it's funny that demons in the show are said to be people who were damned to hell that have gone insane and become ontologically evil. And they're these wandering ghost-like spirits that torment people. I'm like, this is actually more connected to the ancient Jewish literature than they think.
right.
Yeah, I was like, first I thought that's a really weird concept, but then I listened to Lord of Spirits, clink, another plug for them. It's like actually they got some of this right. But yeah, the whole Enochian and Jubilees references are all over the Gospels. It's just we're too blind to see it because we're not
That's
used
right.
to reading books like Enoch and Jubilees, which were common reading for people like Jesus.
That's
They would
right.
have known about these books, and we know the apostles knew about these books because they quote them verbatim, right?
Right.
In some
Sometimes
passages,
they even reference it, like Jude when he says,
right?
Enoch the seventh from Adam has said.
Coming with 10,000s upon 10,000s of his holy ones.
That's
That's
right.
not anywhere else in the Bible. It's in the book of Enoch.
It is,
And
and he's even giving it reference that it's from the Book of Enoch.
and giving it credibility by quoting that. I mean, I think the
That's
stupidest
right.
thing I've ever heard was saying, "Well, I quote Lord of the Rings sometimes to make a point." Is that I'm like, "Oh my gosh, really?" It's like, first of all,
He's
there was
quoting
no
it as
fantasy.
prophecy.
Yeah,
Interestingly enough,
exactly.
I guess that Saint Jerome, actually, somebody challenged Saint Jerome and said, well, the Book of Enoch can't be scripture because how could it have survived the flood? And
Mm,
Saint Jerome said, that's a good question. I guess Noah had a copy on the ark.
that's a good point. Yeah, yeah. Or it was oral tradition, which of course we know there was a
It
very strong oral tradition.
Yeah, my bet is that it would probably be oral tradition. The other
Yeah,
thing is that the earliest traditions we have about the Book of Enoch suggest that the first part of it was actually written on wax tablets, which
yeah.
obviously we wouldn't have today.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, and then you
but
got all the Kalu texts from
right,
Samaria, and of course the Greco-Roman stories about the Titans and the giants and the demigods
exactly.
and all that, which all corroborate this. And yeah, I mean, and it's funny, specifically to Pan in relation to all of this. Pan actually does get several mentions in the Bible or passing references
Right,
in both the New and the Old Testament. The most obvious one is when Jesus is sitting at Mount Hermon, which, if you know anything about
right.
Enoch, Mount Hermon is the
Is a
mountain
big
where,
deal.
right, it's where the Watchers descended and planned their corruption of mankind. And also, this is the place called Mount Bashan in Psalm, which means place of the serpent, where the giants lived, King Og of Bashan, who was 13 feet tall. Um,
Hmm.
and it's funny, he's sitting there and he asks, the apostles, who do people say that I am? some think you're Elijah, some people think you're John resurrected, some people say you're a prophet or whatever. And he's like, well, who do you say I am? And then you get that famous answer from Peter, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he says, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonas, for you, flesh did not reveal this to you, but my Father is in heaven. You are Peter, upon this rock I will build my church, right? And then he says, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Here's the thing. Jesus and the apostles are at Mount Hermon. There is literally a place you can still visit today in Caesarea Philippi, where this is located, called Pan's Grotto. Okay, you can still go see it. It's an underwater pool of clear water, and there are ruins there where the cult of Pan used to meet. And the Greeks called this big pool of water the gate of hell. And of course, if you're familiar with a lot of mythology, deep watery places were always associated as gates to the underworld. That includes the Norse, the Greeks, and the Hebrews. And I mean, well, think about it. Where does Jonah go when he falls into the ocean? He's swallowed by a fish and dragged down into the water. There's all that kind of stuff. Baptism, you're plunged down into the abyss and then raised up again, right? So you have all these references here. And then you have the pigs with Legion when they say, don't send us into the abyss. And as soon as Jesus puts them into the pigs, where do they jump? Off a cliff and into the water, which is the abyss, right? So this place is literally called by the Greeks the gates of hell. And Jesus is in that geographic location when he says that. So there's your first reference to Pan. And then later on, or earlier on in the Old Testament, we have this figure called Azazel, right? And if you're familiar with that, the word scapegoat, not a very good translation, but this is where the two goats are picked, one for Yahweh and one for this mysterious being called Azazel. And it's funny, the lot is cast, and the one that's cast that falls for Azazel, the goat has the sins of the people placed upon it, and then the goat is sent out alive into the wilderness to bear the sins away from people. But eventually they got to the point where they threw the goat off a cliff because they didn't want it coming back into the camp. Apparently that happened a few times, and that could turn your whole camp unclean, because the person who touched the goat and had to escort it out was unclean for 7 days. But yeah, so they kept coming back apparently, and they just said, throw the thing off the cliff, right, awkward. And so, but then you had the other goat, which was taken for Yahweh, and its blood was it was killed outside the camp, not on the altar. Its blood was collected, and the blood was poured upon the altar to atone for the altar, right, to make it a pure vessel worthy for worship. And this is done every single year. And the cool thing about this is, who is this weird being known as Azazel? And this is one of the reasons I don't like most modern translations of the Old Testament, because it leaves this word Azazel out. Right. Azazel is one of the fallen angels mentioned, along with Samyaza, who is the ringleader of these angels, of whom all the blame for the incidents with the Nephilim and the giants is ascribed to. And, and he's often shown as this demonic, desert-like being who lives in the wilderness. And the whole idea of sending the goat to Azazel is not as a sacrifice to appease Azazel, but that the wilderness where Azazel lives is a spiritual garbage dump. So where does sin belong? It belongs in the spiritual garbage. Right. So this is not saying, oh, please, Azazel, don't kill us here, have this goat. It's saying, this is trash. It belongs with you. It's very insulting. But I've seen some modern depictions of Azazel, and he often looks a lot like Pan. We know that the Canaanites had satyrs in their mythology, much like the Greeks. Even some of depictions of Baal have him with a pair of horns on his head. It's not a headdress, it's an actual pair of horns growing out of his head. And so there is good reason to believe that maybe Azazel was a proto-Pan for the Canaanites. But yeah, so I'm not surprised that in that story I told that a being looking like that showed up. Definitely. So yeah,
Definitely not.
right.
Well, I have one that I know you'll be interested in.
Do tell.
It's pretty good. So it's so there's a place called um Portlock, Alaska.
Mm,
And if you go there today, it's totally abandoned. Some
mm,
of the houses have even collapsed. It's just totally abandoned. But at the turn of the 20th century, it was actually a burgeoning community, really
mm.
beautiful part of Alaska. Early on in the 20th century, they actually got a post office and they were an official town settlement. It was um, thought that it was going to be really successful, actually, because it was right there. Logging was prominent right there. But here's the thing, the native population, which, by the way, shout out to the Aleutians because most of them are Eastern Orthodox like us. So shout
That's
out to
right.
our brothers, the Aleutians,
Saint
who in
Peter
this
the Alley would
instance,
pray for us.
that's right. In this instance, the Aleutians were smart enough to leave that area and they told the mostly white people moving in, you shouldn't move here because there's this monster that comes and it will kill you. And uh, I forget
Mm,
what the word is, and I'm probably going to not pronounce it very well anyway, but basically, it's Beast Man or Man Beast was the
mm.
name that the native Aleutians had given this creature that would attack people. Well, the settlement people, they said, whatever, we have guns, we don't care. You guys are primitive and stupid anyway. Which, I mean, this is in like the 1900s, so how primitive could they even be? But whatever. So,
Suit yourself, white boy. I'm out of here.
right, exactly.
Hey,
So,
one plug real quick before you continue. I have a friend of mine, and his wife is a black lady, and she said when she was watching a horror movie, said, "You want to know the difference between black folk and white folk when they were, and just non-white folks in general?" He said, "When they encounter something horrible, we say we out of here, and all white folks say, nah, don't worry about it." He said, "This is why non-white folks should live in horror movies, not
that's
die."
right. That's right.
Yeah.
She has a good point there, and this demonstrates it because even when all of these white settlers were getting, they would hire the Aleutians to come and work for them during the day, but the
Mm-hmm.
Aleutians were out of there by nightfall. They would not stay in the town, and everybody was, this is so stupid. What's going on? So okay, but then after a while, first there was this guy who was always going out into the mines and then he would come back and he'd have gold and stuff. So he was
Mm.
really excited, but one day he goes out to the mines and he just never came back. They couldn't
Oh
find
wow.
him. Another guy is out logging and he turned around and he saw this large, what he thought was like maybe a man or maybe a bear, and it picked up a piece of his logging equipment and just cracked him across the head with it, like a big piece of equipment
Whoa.
that you'd need a crane to lift, but this thing just picks it up, clocks him across the head. The guy ends up dying from his wounds later, and everybody's freaked out about it, and a whole bunch of people start going missing, and they
Mm.
find these mangled corpses in the bog near the town. There's just these horribly mangled corpses, and everybody starts blaming bears, but some of the people who knew a little bit more about wildlife start saying, well, the problem is that if bears wanted to eat people, they'd just eat them.
Yeah, they
They
just leave the
don't,
body there. They don't care. Yeah.
right, they don't drag the body off to a bog and then,
Mm.
torture somebody to death. This is not bear behavior. This isn't any animal's behavior. This is the sort of thing that only the most depraved humans do, and yet we're seeing it done by something that's clearly much stronger than a human.
Mm.
And just really all this stuff keeps happening. Well, finally, little by little, all the people start moving out of Portlock. They're like, you can't pay me enough to live here. I'm gone. and they start going exactly the way that the Aleutian people had already left. And I just imagine all these
Wow.
Aleutians sitting there saying, "Told you so, haha."
Yeah.
But yeah, they're moving out, and finally, the postmaster of the town, he was the only one left because everyone else had left. But the U.S. Postal Service said he had to stay until a certain date. So
Wow.
he was there, and he said that I think he said it was well, it was the last night that he was there, but it was like the middle of the time that they told him he had to stay, and he heard something outside of his house, and he hears like scratching at the door and all of that. So something knew he was in there and is scratching at the door, kind of pawing at it, and then he hears these like almost gigantic footsteps, just like boom, 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 coming up to the windows, and he sees this big like bear man thing looking in his windows. Like, whoa. And he got so freaked out that he wrote a letter to the US Postal Service that basically said, "You can fire me, I don't care, I'm out." He left Portlock, and no one has ever returned to Portlock. There's no settlement there to this day. The only people who have ever gone are groups of usually young people who are dumb enough to actually desire an encounter with whatever it is that drove the people out of Portlock. But but yeah, no.
Golly.
So that is a true paranormal story, really
Mm.
happened. There is no explanation other than the paranormal that anyone, other than some people still to this day try to say that bears did it. But like I said before, people who actually know anything about bears know that bears just do not behave this way.
Then people
Um,
with primitive weapons have killed bears,
that's right.
with stone-tipped arrowheads and stone-tipped spears. These guys are armed with 20th century firearms. Do you
Right.
really think a bear would stand up to that? I mean, come on.
Right.
It's wow.
Exactly.
It's amazing to me how people will rationalize something away. It's like what was it in the Christmas story or the Christmas Carol when Ebenezer Scrooge sees Jacob Marley and he's like saying you were probably a dab of mustard or a piece of undigested beef, but you aren't
Right.
there. And then finally it's like, hear me, Scrooge. And he's like, never mind.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's true though. People do. They rationalize stuff away. They don't want to admit what they're seeing. But man, oh
yeah,
man.
and that there's actually a short story I read. You ought to look it up. It was done by the Simply Scary podcast for
Oh
Chilling
yeah.
Tales and Dark Nights. It was called Eating Strangers was the name of the story. And the plot premise is that there's a guy who's a werewolf and he's married to a woman who's not, and she knows what he is, right? And he like once a month goes out into the woods and he picks a random hiker or jogger to eat, and his wife knows it and she's like just disgusted by this fact. But anyway, you hear the thoughts in his head the whole time. He's like, I found my prey. He's like, and then I set up my ambush. And he said I'd already fully transformed by then. And like he said, he jumps out at the jogger, and he said the look on this jogger's face was the strangest I'd ever seen. He said it wasn't one of fear, it wasn't one of terror, or he said or anything. He said it was of denial. He's like, and he said then he's so disgusted. He said I became disgusted and infuriating. He said he was so denying. He said that it could something like me could exist. He's like, I could see it on his face. I should not be there. I should not be standing 10 feet in front of him. I should not exist. And that made me more angry. And I was like, what an interesting perspective.
Right.
And of course, he eats the
Exactly.
guy. But yeah, I was like, that was an interesting reaction from the victim he was about to kill. That you should not be here. This should not exist. What's in front of me? You know?
I think that's going to happen when all these atheists start seeing demonic manifestations, that's going to be their reaction. Like, no, you can't be
Yeah.
here. I don't believe in you.
Right, and it's sort of like that Neil Gaiman's books, American Gods. Have you, where the
Yes.
gods are created by people's thoughts? So if you stop believing in them, they die. And it's like that's kind of what atheists do in some
Right.
ways. If I disbelieve it enough, it'll go away. You know?
Exactly. Exactly. I think
Yeah.
that's interesting too, because that's actually, there's a whole bunch of that in modern, storytelling, that there's this idea that, like, if you don't believe in these, I watched a horror movie, and it was a pretty good horror movie, except that the premise was basically there's this voodoo witch and she's really evil and
Mm.
she kills people and stuff, but the premise is she can only hurt you if you believe that voodoo is real. And I'm going, well, that's lame. Like,
What a
she
stupid
has to
story.
convince people that her voodoo
Yeah.
is real, and then she can hurt them. And I'm like,
Wow.
this is like you're Ted Bundy with a whole lot of extra steps. Just be Ted Bundy and stab people if it takes that much
Yeah,
work.
I,
Like,
I really hate horror films that all of a sudden make it all about it's all in your head and you're your own worst
right.
enemy. And it's like a film that did that was M. Night Shyamalan's The Village. I
Yeah, that
I
one.
liked that film until I found out the end of it.
Right.
And it's like, and there was another one. It was a recent werewolf film. I can't remember what it was called, but it was about this werewolf attacking people in Alaska, and the sheriff becomes more and more convinced it's a werewolf, and everything in the film is pointing towards it being a werewolf. All the patterns are right, all the claw marks are
Right.
werewolf bites, and it turns out the dude's a serial killer who's gone insane, and he's made this very convincing looking werewolf suit from werewolf pelts. And so the whole thing is that the scariest thing there is an insane human being who thinks he's a monster. And I'm like, no. And I think the film actually punked itself because the sheriff, when he confronts the guy, gets stabbed by a knife by the guy who's acting like a werewolf. And the guy's bonkers. I mean, he's like growling at them and snarling at them and stuff. And
Right.
he chases after the guy. And when he finally catches up with him, the guy tries to knife the sheriff one more time and he shoots him. And as he goes down on the ground, he like stands over him and just like bang, 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 like shoots him like
Right.
10 times in the head. And it's like, I'm sorry, but that's not nearly as scary as a werewolf. And I
Right.
hate films
Exactly.
that do that. It's like, oh yeah, you're the scariest thing there is. And I'm like, please.
Like, no, I'm not the
I
scariest
can
thing
kill
there.
another human being. It's not that hard.
Right.
I can't kill something that's part man, part beast, and wants to eat me. It's like,
Exactly. Something
yeah.
that's, yeah, exactly. No, I remember one time actually it was on the Marvel show Daredevil. They kind of talk about that because there's Daredevil is Catholic, and so there's a lot of
Hmm.
these Catholic themes throughout. And
Yeah.
it was really interesting because he's talking to his priest, and his priest says, back when I was in seminary, I went through this phase where I was really studious, but I wasn't very pious. And I developed a theory that Satan was not real.
Yeah, that he was just a
Because,
force or a personification
right.
of evil. Yeah.
And he says, even in the Old Testament, the word Satan is actually, it just means enemy, and there are
Which he's
people
not
who are
wrong.
called
Yeah.
Satan. Right.
Yeah.
There's lots of people and entities and even whole nations that get called Satan. And
Yeah.
then he said, so what happened though is that I ended up going on a mission trip in Africa, and all this stuff was happening, and there was this warlord who showed up, and he showed up specifically to murder all these people in this village.
Hmm.
And he says, as I watched, women and children begging for mercy, and this horrible guy just grinning and killing them, I realized that there are depths of depravity that cannot come from within the human heart, that something
Right.
more evil than us had to be influencing this man,
Yeah.
because at one time this guy who's murdering
Was a
people
little kid.
was a little kid who couldn't imagine stuff like this. So how could this
Right.
happen? And I thought that was so great because that's so
Hmm.
true. Like
Yeah.
no matter
And
who we are, we cannot deny. I've said it 1,000 times. Atheism is nothing but a wealthy Western luxury. It's a
yeah,
first world
yeah,
luxury. You
it
can
really
only be
is.
an
Yeah.
atheist because you've never encountered real suffering. You've never encountered real evil. You know,
Or
I
real
mean,
goodness for that
right.
matter.
You've
You know,
probably never encountered real
real
goodness.
humanity. Yeah.
Exactly.
Real
So that's
holiness. Yeah.
that's the only reason you can be an atheist is because you have never truly experienced the depths or the heights of humanity, the depths or the heights of even just the
Right.
world around us. And
And
that's the only reason.
now that you mentioned that story from Daredevil, that really makes me think that the Reformed community is very prone to fall into rationalism and very prone to fall
Yes.
into more agreement with atheism that I think is healthy for a Christian. So, like, for example, I don't see why a Reformed person could not be like that priest in Daredevil when he says, oh, it's probably just a personification for humanity. And now I know most of Reformed people say, oh, no, I believe in a real devil. Okay, sure. But when you believe that humans are totally depraved, you have to, in that situation, believe that that African warlord is acting on basic human nature,
Right.
right? Because of the doctrine of total depravity. Like, yep, this is totally natural for a human to act in this way. And I'm like, I've never really, there's a reason we call acts like that inhumane,
Right.
right? Yeah, it's like the term inhumane makes no sense if this is the way humans naturally act towards each
Exactly.
other. And this is why I think it's so important to read Second Temple Jewish literature,
Yes.
because the one thing they never blame the entirety of the fall or falls of mankind, there's three of them,
That's
on
right.
humanity. They blame them primarily upon mankind's interaction with the fallen members of God's divine council. For example, they said, yeah, man fell in the garden, and yes, man was able to commit evil, but these really nasty like forms of evil which take a very dark imagination to come
Hmm.
up with. Most of the Jewish sources were overwhelmingly saying, yeah, man didn't think this up on his own.
Right.
He was taught this stuff, like
Exactly.
sorcery, black magic,
Abortion.
abortion, bestiality, homosexuality, all that kind of stuff, and what do you call that? Pedophilia.
Right.
Even like body modification. The
Yes.
enlightenment of the eyes and drugs and things. These were all like the secrets of the earth that God had either withheld because they were evil, or he had withheld because it was too much. Because that's the other thing, they show them how to make technology like weapons
Right.
of war and steel and iron and all those kind of things. And it's like, yeah, so it's like when you start thinking in those terms, that it's actually these demonic forces of evil that are influencing mankind, and it's not coming from a human heart, that we're created in the image of God. We know what's intrinsically right and wrong, and that most humans don't want to kill each other. I mean,
Right.
the Easter Truce, for example, in 1915 in World War One, you had German and British forces in horrible bloody trench warfare who on Christmas Day called a truce, and then for like 2 weeks or more their generals couldn't make them fight.
Right.
It's like humans, if given the chance, would rather not kill each other.
Right.
And the
Exactly.
ones, they even interviewed soldiers after World War One saying they purposefully shot to miss other people. And it's like, I'm sorry, but we have data after data after data saying this is not normal human behavior where humans enjoy
Right.
killing other humans.
I
So,
mean, why does it if it's so normal, why does it cause post-traumatic stress disorder to kill somebody?
right, you should be just totally fine. You
Exactly.
should just be, yeah, this is the natural thing. I kill other people, I'm totally brave, it's part of my nature. But no, it's always like, I killed a man. How did I do that? It's,
Right.
yeah. And why is it the Ted Bundys of the world show no emotion or reaction when they do that? And they've been
That's right.
shown because they're clinically insane. There's something wrong up there,
That's right.
Not
Which actually,
rationalizing that away, but you get the point.
exactly. Which
Yeah,
actually, in Orthodoxy, we even would say that that clinical insanity starts with demonic influence, and
then
that's not to say
yeah,
that everybody who is, in a mental institution
sure.
is demonically possessed or something like that. We don't say
Some are
that,
born that way. Yeah,
but we recognize that there's always a demonic influence happening that leads to um, these things, even if the person themselves may be, a devout Christian or maybe a devout Christian now. There's always something that we can see.
yeah.
It's not just we can't just blame the nature for it. There's always something
Right.
influencing
There's a
it.
nurture going on there somewhere. So just out of curiosity, what do you think that the man beast was? I think we may have the same conclusion, but I'm just curious.
Well, my thought is that either it could be some kind of Nephilim
A
creature,
remnant, yeah,
or um like a demonic entity, something similar to what people call Bigfoot, some kind of demonic entity like a
right.
fairy spirit that lives, because in Celtic mythology, fair we think of fairies as like these little
Oh,
winged
cute.
infant things, but
Yeah,
in actual
Tinkerbells.
Celtic
Yeah,
mythology, fairies are terrifying.
yeah, they're
They're,
monstrous. Yeah,
so I think it could be something like that, some kind of fairy creature living out
right.
there. And that's actually what I think of Bigfoot
Buffet.
too, that it's like a fairy
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
that lives out
Even
in the woods.
the Celtic giants are magical creatures. The
That's right.
Fomorians, right, are these things which can blend in with the trees, and they have these magical abilities to shapeshift and things. So, yeah, I've often thought that Bigfoot might be a last remnant of the Nephilim or something like that, or the last remnant of the giants. I mean, it seems that they're able to avoid detection and only be seen when they want to be seen. And I was thinking,
Right.
we have the technology to track them down if there's some sort of animal or a species of ape that we haven't tracked before. And so it just seems like that's an impossibility. But just the fact there's so many sightings of them, and the fact that there's myths about these things from various Native American tribes throughout the U.S. It just seems very unlikely it's just some drunk dude seeing something on his off day, right?
Right.
And yeah, I was about to say, yeah, the Nephilim, last remnant of the Nephilim is certainly a possibility. I think I don't think they're completely gone, so who
Right.
knows?
I
Yeah,
think it's difficult for me to say that they'd be completely gone, because we know that the Nephilim ritual was still happening in, at least in South America. We know that it was still happening up to the time of the conquistadors.
yeah,
So
yeah. And there's a
if
revival of the Aztec religion in South
that's
America.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And of course, as paganism continues to grow, we might see more of this transhumanism stuff. Now, will we see authentic Nephilim giants? Probably not, because I think it would just be too obvious. But I
Right.
think we may see things like, for example, with the growing trends in transgenderism and the body modifications for like people who don't want to age and all that kind of stuff. I think we may see what we call transhumanism come out with using machines, using animal DNA. We're already got pig valves, for goodness sake.
Right.
And they're already making animal hybrids, like what they did with the. There's actually folks, go to, if you don't believe me, go to YouTube and look up a National Geographic program where they talk about where they hybridize goats and spiders. You ever seen that
Oh,
one?
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to tell you about
I
this,
know
what
about
they
the fish tomato thing.
Yeah, yeah. So what they did is they wanted to milk spider silk because spider silk is so versatile, as a fabric, and it's stronger than steel wire. Like it can hold
Right.
almost 100 pounds more, than steel wire can. And the problem is, they said even if they had a million spiders, they wouldn't make enough silk from their webs to be able to mass produce the silk the way they needed. So they had to find another way to do it. So what they did is they spliced these goat fetuses with the DNA of certain spiders that produced a certain type of silk. And the goats were born. They looked totally normal. They look like normal everyday goats. They eat grass. And the spider said they're about 1/75th spider DNA wise. And that's what he says in the video. And then what they do is they milk the goat and it produces this protein that you find in spider silk, and they put it in a machine and it weaves out a thread. And I'm like, how long before this is applied to humanity?
Right.
How long? It's not going to be that long. And I think that, in all honesty, with the growing rise of paganism, I think that eventually, and even with the growing rise of people believing that aliens are real, right?
Right.
I mean, you have people who are like, it's not just the nutcases like Alex Jones. You got people like, scientists saying, yeah, aliens are real, and the U.S. government saying we can confirm aliens are real. And I think what they're going to do is the aliens will present themselves, and I'm just spitballing here, as like these creatures that have evolved past the need to have a body. So what they'll do to have them be able to interact with us is we'll create machines, right? We'll create like Terminator articulated bodies, and then we'll, quote, either download them into the computer, or with dying family members, download their conscience into these artificial bodies. But I think the problem is we're not going to get a human spirit in there. We're going to get something else,
Exactly.
which is basically what idolatry is in the ancient world. The idols were made to be bodies for the gods. And I'm like, well, now we're going to have bodies for our dead ancestors and bodies for our alien visitors. And I'm like, this is just going to be idolatry 2.0. I know Seraphim Rose.
Idolatry with extra steps.
I know I sound crazy right now, but I'm like, I don't care. I don't care.
Well, you may sound crazy, but the thing is, you're not the only one saying it, because
no, I'm not. No.
Father Seraphim Rose was saying the same things in his day, and everybody said it was implausible. And now it's not that long, and they're already making sci-fi movies about it. So,
look at the recent Godzilla film.
Plausible.
Look at the recent Godzilla film when Godzilla versus Kong. I mean, you had Mecha Godzilla that was being powered by the spirit or the essence of King Ghidorah, who was Godzilla's old defeated foe. And it's in the image of Godzilla. It's like literally an idol, a false idol of Godzilla, who's supposed to be the savior figure of the movie. And it was like, this is very deeply spiritual on the philosophical level.
It is.
Wow.
And the thing is, I don't even know if Adam Wingart realizes how
I don't think he does, no.
he's writing mythology for modern people, and I don't even think he gets it. But it's almost like humanity can't escape our mythological tropes, because it's like, if Godzilla is the savior figure, there has to be an antichrist who is sort of an idol that seeks to defeat him, and it just is.
and I find what's interesting, and I may be taking this a stretch too far, but you have Godzilla and Kong who fight each other, right? So in a way, they're both good guys, or sort of, right? But it's like, and Kong is supposed to be like humanity's champion, right? And Godzilla is this totally other transcendent savior figure that's larger than life that humanity can't comprehend. And the two are fighting, right? And of course, Godzilla wins. He's just more powerful, right? But he doesn't kill Kong, right? But then you get them working in synergy to take down the false idol. You get a human-like nature, Kong, right? This primate figure. And then you've got the divine Godzilla-like creature who works in tandem with Kong to take down this false idol sort of thing. And like, I thought that was interesting, the whole synergy of that. And it's like,
it is. There was a very synergistic kind of thing happening. I know we just triggered a bunch of Calvinists because we said synergy, but deal with it.
Deal with it, kids.
That's something funny too, is kind of, I threw kind of a joke at Calvinists there, so I'll offer them an olive branch on this. I think it's interesting that a lot of Calvinists, they study the church fathers and they see the predestination stuff in a lot of the early fathers, which is true. You actually can find early fathers teaching, like Irenaeus seems to be teaching a kind of predestination. But the funny thing is that all of those same fathers are synergists, and
Yeah.
very clearly, even St. Augustine, who's every Calvinist's favorite father, but St.
Yeah.
Augustine is a synergist. He said, God created us without our consent, but he will
But he
not
won't
save
save
us
us without it.
without our consent. And it's like,
Oops.
yeah, I mean, that, he's, so even, Augustine is definitely not a monergist in any kind of way that we would use the
Right.
term. And
Speaking of which, I might need to do one on monoenergism, another
yeah,
heresy that gets
I think you
forgotten.
should.
Yeah, that's a very subtle heresy that I think that most Reformed people probably don't realize they actually believe in more than one way. But yeah,
Right. I think it's interesting, with the, if you really believe in this sort of monergistic thing where everything is predestined, which, by the way, in Orthodoxy, we believe that God is in control of all things. The issue we take with the idea of this sort of fixed destiny thing is that it sort of makes God into a puppet master, and I know Calvinists will object to that, but if destiny is fixed, then he's just putting on a show, and I
for
don't see a way
himself. Yeah.
around it.
Yeah,
I just
I
don't.
mean, look at, like, for example, Spurgeon, where he was watching the dust motes float through his office, and he said that there was not one dust mote that God had not predestined to fall in its exact place. And I'm just like, okay, if something as random as a dust mote is completely predestined by God to fall where God wants it exactly, it's like, how do you have any sort of room to say that humans are not in the same boat? It's like, like, well, they want to almost give man some sort of free will because they want man to be able to be culpable for his sin. But I'm just like,
Right,
that's hard to do when you read Calvin, or if you read one of his, what I would argue, I don't know if Calvin even knew this guy exists, but Gottschalk of Orbais,
right,
who was condemned as a heretic, who said, yeah, God predetermines your besetting sins. He predetermines exactly the sins you're going to commit. And it's like, how do you get around that? And of course, they say, well, Calvin's not my end all be all. But I'm like, yeah, but he thought up your doctrine. It's like,
right,
it's hard to separate the man from his thoughts, or the artist from his art, and it's like,
right. Exactly. It's like, I mean, it's kind of like I joke around with my wife now every time we're watching a movie and it says Weinstein Brothers Productions. I always nudge her and I'm like, oh, but it is. It's like even if we love the movie, it's like just seeing that guy's name on it makes us go, that's cringy. And
yeah, it
and it's
is.
the same
Yeah,
way with well, Calvin's not the end all be all. My favorite is, well, I'm not a Calvinist because of Calvin, I'm a Calvinist because of the Bible. And I'm like, okay, but you're getting your interpretation of the Bible filtered through John Calvin, and I know that
right.
because his interpretation wasn't there before whenever he was
Right.
50,
Or they'll try
I
to really oddly cite Augustine, which I'm like, that really doesn't work when you get down to it. It's like, if you really honestly read Augustine, I had a fellow today tell me that he's enjoying reading Augustine. He goes to a Calvary chapel, this fellow I was speaking to, and he said that he really likes what he's reading about the real presence and about baptismal regeneration and then intercession of the saints, but he said he doesn't believe that Augustine believed Mary was sinless. I'm like, I hate to break it to you, bud. I gave him a quote from his book, The Natura, and it's like, he
right,
quite clearly says that she was exempt from original sin. Um,
right,
I'm like, sorry to bust your bubble. I'm not saying you should hate Augustine, but you really shouldn't say that because
right.
he quite clearly believed that.
Yeah, it's interesting how Saint Augustine, like the Bible, gets quoted in such a way that it's like, oh, Saint Augustine was just like me, and I find it interesting that
Mhm.
Saint Augustine was just like everybody who quotes him, and
Right.
uh, and none
Except
of
for the
them,
Catholic Church, who quotes him quite
right?
more than the Calvinists do. Which
Exactly,
I'm like, so why are they wrong? you know,
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
if you want to mess with their heads, just tell them you're an Augustinian synergist.
That's great. That's
Right.
great. I mean, to a certain degree, I think Lutherans are a little bit more honest about
Yeah, oh yeah.
their relationship to Augustine, because they do the whole, well, we're saved monergistically or we're damned
Synergistically.
monergistically by
Or
man or something like that.
yeah. It's both monergism, just one's man and one's God. And it's
Although
funny.
I'd say that it's actually both synergism. You're either
You're
saved
synergizing
because
with the
of
devil,
your
yeah.
united effort with God, or you're damned because of your united effort with demons.
Right,
So either
and
way,
that's
it's synergism.
theosis versus demonosis, which is a real thing, where
That's right.
sin is a participation in the damned nature of demons. Yeah, that's a scary thought, and I think it's interesting that when you really prod Lutherans on patristics, most of them were willing to say, "Yep, most of, if not all, the church fathers were synergists. There's
Hmm.
no doubt about it." But I'm just like, then how are you still a monergist then? And I guess what they hold out hope is that Augustine was somewhat of a monergist in some way. And it's
Right.
just like, I'm sorry, I don't hedge my bets on that fin of the odds. It's like,
Right.
no. And I just couldn't live with myself knowing that like, yeah, they were all synergists, but they were all wrong about that. It's just like,
Right.
yeah, so they were
Whenever we
wrong for
have to say
1,500
that the
years.
church fathers were wrong,
Hmm. I mean,
like,
you might be able to find one or two things that were wrong with a church father here and there, but
right.
like never on something that major. Never on
And
something that major.
how could all of them be wrong? I mean, that seems like,
Yeah.
how could the entire church be wrong on
Right.
something like
Polycarp, the
did,
disciple of John?
right.
Really? Ignatius, the disciple of John? I'm like, Clement,
Exactly.
the disciple of Peter? Wrong?
Yeah,
It's like, oh my gosh, a very, very scary place to be. I mean, if you can't trust your church's own history, what can you trust?
exactly. Exactly. If we can't trust, I mean, the truth is, if we can't trust the church, then that means that at some point the Holy Spirit
Drop the
left,
ball. Yeah.
which, right, or dropped the ball, which I don't see why we could trust anything to. How can we trust our own reading of the Bible if we can't trust the reading of the people who received it?
Right. And then, putting all your stake in the Bible as well, in that sort of way. It's like, okay, if sola scriptura was meant to be the only authority, why did the Lord wait almost 400 years to canonize the New Testament?
That's right.
And even after it's canonized, after 400 years, the methodology of the church's teaching never changed
That's
until
right.
the Reformation. Even and the Bible was canonized in response to the growing heretical views of Marcion,
Right.
which even after he was dead, continued on for some time, and he had a pretty large following, from what I understand.
Yeah, which
Um,
I don't really understand why there was ever an appeal with Marcion. His views are so confusing. But
Probably a lot of anti-Semitism, if I had to guess, because Marcion really hated anything that had to do with Semitic people, which is why
it's
he
true.
got rid of John and Mark and Matthew and kept only Luke and Acts and most of Paul. But yeah, it's just really strange. I don't know how they arrived at that, but oh well.
He was also super obsessed with the idea that the Old Testament was bad, which I guess we still see that sort of semi-Marcionism today among all the people who
Yeah,
say,
Andy Stanley, for example.
right, exactly. Oh, we don't need the Old Testament.
Unhitch
You
yourself from
know,
the Old Testament. Yeah, it's
it's
like
like, no.
no. And then of course, I didn't even know this, but Marcion put up an icon of himself in his own church and an icon of Paul. Yeah,
Whoa.
his iconostasis was himself and Paul.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah,
That is,
yeah. That should tell you all you need to know.
yeah,
Yeah, he wanted to
exactly.
start the first New Testament church.
Ah, that is
Yeah,
scary. That is scary.
and yeah. How many people
Talk about
echo that?
demonosis.
Yeah, how many people echo that sentiment today? That
Oh
I
yeah,
want to start a house church that's a New Testament church. Oh, I know who your patron saint is.
exactly. Your
Yeah.
iconostasis can look just like his.
Well, right. I think it was. Did he encounter? I can't remember if it was Polycarp or Irenaeus, but Marcion went. I think it was Irenaeus. He went to encounter. He went to meet Irenaeus, who had come for a visit in his town, and he was like sort of prideful and like went up to Irenaeus and said, "Do you know who I am?" And thought he would be like, "Oh yes, you're Marcion," And he looked at him. He's like, "Yes, you are Marcion, the son of the devil."
You know what would make that story even funnier is if Irenaeus first said, "Who?"
Yeah, yeah. Who? Like that scene from Guardians of the Galaxy.
Exactly. That'd
Oh,
be
that would have been
hilarious.
funny.
Just like, do
Who?
you know
Who are
who I
you?
am? No. Who are you?
Oh, it was Polycarp, not Irenaeus. It was Polycarp.
Oh,
Yeah,
there you go.
you are
Polycarp.
You are Marcion, the son of the devil. Yeah,
I love it. I love it.
yeah.
Well, he was. He
He
certainly
was.
was.
Yeah, and apparently Tertullian said that Marcion had tried to reconcile with the church. Historians very much doubt that is the case. But I found it interesting that Tertullian sort of took up for Marcion, which I was like, whoa.
Yeah, Tertullian definitely had some serious
To be
issues.
honest, yeah, and to be honest with you, I actually find Origin more appealing than Tertullian in many regards. In fact,
Right.
just a plug here, maybe I could do one on this, but I don't know if any of our viewers are familiar with Father John Baer.
Yeah.
Um, he's kind of an expert on Origin, and he actually has made a fairly interesting case that Origin actually may have been greatly misinterpreted by people who liked some of his ideas and sort of ran with it, but that he may himself was not an originist in some
Right.
ways. I'm like, that's an interesting thought, huh? Because I mean, it's kind of hard to doubt Origen's influence on the later fathers of the church. I mean, the Cappadocians, the Augustine,
Right.
Ambrose were all Athanasius were all students, in more or less, of Origen. And it's like,
It's
maybe there's
true.
something to that. You know,
If nothing else, his philosophical method was definitely taken up by really the rest of the church for
hmm
years to come.
yeah,
Um, his philosophical method is kind of the foundation of Augustine's method. The medieval Catholic Church
yeah,
certainly was employing his method.
yeah,
So, yeah, you
yeah,
can't doubt Origen's influence on the whole
yeah.
of Christianity, not
Right,
just
and
the East.
right, and he was never, formally condemned like say Nestorius is, for
Right.
example. So I think that
The
was really a
Origenists were,
yes,
but
yeah. I think that was a really wide, like you'll see icons of Origin that won't have a halo, right? But
right,
nonetheless, he's like teaching the other church fathers. I think that was a wise move on the church to not be hasty to condemn him because of the positive influence he's had, but at the same time not to saint him either because of some of the questionable things that have come out. So
right,
that was a wise move, I think. But yeah,
definitely.
definitely.
Yeah, hopefully we'll know for sure when we get to heaven and Origin can tell us. Hopefully he'll be there and he can tell us,
I hope
yeah, I
he is.
wasn't
Yeah.
teaching universalism. These knuckleheads came
That
along.
followed me around and copied down everything I said, published it like it was gospel. Yeah.
I was just joking around when I said this.
Yeah, they left my context out. That's why.
Exactly.
Originists. Yeah. I'm the original Origin. I'm the OO.
That's right. The OO. That's like how people
Original
say OC
gangster.
now.
Or the OG.
He's the
Yeah.
OO.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
I love it. I love it.
Very good.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Caleb. And
Sure.
I want to encourage everybody. I have a link in the description below. Head to the Queen of Peace website for our store and definitely pick up some. We have lots of great books. We have lots of Father Stephen DeYoung talks about a lot of the stuff we were talking about today. Father Andrew Stephen Damick has a new book out. Oh, Oh
Arise, O
God,
God.
Arise. That
Yeah.
one. He talks about a lot of the stuff we were talking about. And those books can help you because, we're sharing these stories of paranormal things, but the reason we want to share them is because, we want you to know that Jesus Christ is the Lord of spirits, as the book of Enoch calls him, and you can overcome all of these entities in him. And we do have, before we go, really quick, one audience question, and it's a good question. Do
Raccoon
you
God.
guys have swords?
Oh, Bacon God. I'm sorry. Yes, I actually
The-
own 2 swords. Yes.
As do I. I gave one
Battle
of them to my
ready
daughter.
handmade swords. Yes. These, like, I don't buy wall hangers. These were very, very, very expensive. So yes, I own an Italian Duguess, which
Oh,
is basically,
nice.
yeah, it's basically an arming sword. It has a really, it tapers to a point. It's made for chainmail piercing, very lightweight, like under 2 pounds. And then I have a Viking longsword, a Nordic
Oh,
longsword.
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
so
have a
fully
Scottish.
functional.
Yeah, I have a Scottish broadsword that I really love, and I actually train with it from time to time, learning the skills with it, how to
Yeah.
do everything. It's really good, beautiful sword, and it's actually made modern metallurgy so that it's even better than like the swords my ancestors would have used,
Cool.
but the same style. It's really awesome. And then I
Yeah.
have another one that's just a short sword that I gave to one of my daughters because it's a little small for me. But
Never underestimate the power of a short sword, by the
that's
way.
right.
I would love eventually to own a Roman gladius. I mean, that's the sword
Yes,
that conquered
those
the
are
world.
awesome.
I mean, lightweight and it's short enough that it can be concealed. And honestly, it's a tactical blade that you could
It
actually
is.
probably still employ today in combat situations that require hand to hand. So,
It
very
is.
great
I've
weapon.
often thought that the military does itself a disservice by not issuing
Hmm.
out something like a gladius that they could just,
Yeah, it's a short
I
sword.
mean,
I mean, you can still hack with it, stab with it. You can do utility things with it. I mean, why not?
exactly. Plus,
Yeah.
in the zombie apocalypse, you and me are gonna do just fine. Just
Oh
cutting our
yeah.
way
I mean,
through all the
right. I could see
back
this
to
is gonna be a
hell, you
little
spawns of the devil.
right, and this would be a little bit darker. But I see some of these riots where people are getting the crap beat out of them by some of these people, and all I was thinking, man, give me about 10 people with some Roman rectangular shields and short
Hmm.
swords. We could take on a crowd of about 200 people easily if we had the
That's
right
right.
formation. It's like there's a reason why Rome was able to beat armies 4 times their size. It's like the correct strategy will win the day. And it's like
That's right.
I could just see it just like, you know, stabbing and then like there's bodies like behind as the formation moves forward and people are like, what the heck's going on? Just staring them
Exactly.
down. Oh man.
Exactly. They're like, oh no, it's the back the blue people. I'm like, nah, I'm all about the red, son.
Yeah. Sorry to get dark there, folks, but hey,
Yeah,
when it comes to weapons, we're gonna get gory. So,
that's right. That's
yeah,
right. Which reminds me, you can read our horror content if you like. However, it's not for kids. Don't read my horror stories if you want kids stuff because it's just not that. And
not
Caleb has
goosebumps,
some horror
people.
content too. So definitely check that out. And yeah, but thank you for your question about swords there because that gave us a chance to kind of
Nerd
nerd
out.
out about. Now, here's a follow-up question to her question is do you have any armor?
Hmm. Yeah,
I
I used to have armor a long time ago, but I sold it. So
Yeah, I've never been able to collect like a good suit of armor just for
yeah,
financial constraints.
it's
Um
expensive. Yeah, and that it takes up a lot of storage space.
it
I had
does.
a chainmail hauberk at one time, and I wore it one time to a Ren fair. I lasted 2 hours in it. I mean, it's heavy, bro.
Right.
But I still have a Norman helmet, the nasal guard helmet.
Oh,
I still have,
sweet.
yeah, I still have that. I'm planning to when I get a more permanent office space to have it displayed, but it's got the chainmail in the back that protects your neck and everything. It's really
Oh, I
cool.
love
Made of
it.
black and steel. Yeah,
Oh, nice. That's so metal.
yeah, literally.
Literally. Yeah, no. That's definitely. Yeah. I would love to have a nice, suit of armor, but it's just
Yeah.
I don't know where I'd store it, and then
And then what are you gonna do with it? You know,
right,
just
wear it
yeah.
to a Renaissance fair. Unless we do get to see like a zombie apocalypse, then I'm good. Or even not even a zombie apocalypse. I watched a documentary about like because people always say, oh, medieval knights they would get their butts kicked by modern militaries, and that's probably true with like drones and stuff.
Well, yeah,
But
with
there was
guns, of
actually a
course.
documentary about like comparing, and the thing is, the reason why kingdoms and everything stopped having knights was not because of the invention of firearms as most people think. It was actually because it became too expensive, because once firearms were invented everybody wanted to be knights because you couldn't kill a knight with a musket. Like if you
Yeah.
shot them, it was just like bink, and then you'd get kind of. So
Yeah,
then
because they
everybody
continued to
wanted to
use
be a
plate
knight,
armor
and
well into the 17th century. In fact, the
exactly,
musketeers in France, the guys who carried guns themselves, wore plate breastplates that the knights wore, and they proved them by actually the blacksmith would shoot them at point blank
right,
range with a pistol, and it would bing, and if he's like, it's good to go,
right,
so they all had a mark on them where he tested it, and so
exactly,
it was like, yeah, of course they repelled bullets. Now, if you shot a guy who was, having light armor like chainmail, yeah, it would probably kill him
right,
really easily. Or you shoot the horse, or whatever. But yeah, if it became too expensive to armor people. Yeah,
right. So,
exactly.
but nowadays maybe it's getting too expensive not to, with the way things are going. So maybe that's
Yeah,
something to think about.
exactly.
Um, well, I just enjoy talking to you way too much, so I don't want to
Yeah,
close out. But
it's all right. I gotta go
we
myself.
are,
So
yeah, we should get going. But thank you for being on the show, and everybody, make sure you watch Caleb's new show. It'll be on Freed Indeed. He's going to be doing it about once a month to start out with on Saturday nights. So definitely check that out.
all right.
God bless.
God bless. Catch y'all around.